There's a sea change that happens in Russia when Putin takes power, because Yeltsin had been one thing, and then Putin is something else entirely. And Putin had become an anti-communist in the 1990s, and he helped Yeltsin fight off the attempts of the communists to regain power. And initially, I think, by the way, Putin identified himself as a Democrat and someone who was in favor of democracy, which worked for him as long as he was actually winning elections, handily and didn't have to rig them. And he didn't have to rig the first few elections very much, and he could allow them to be relatively free because he was popular. But it's Putin who brought a new approach to this. And it's Putin who brought a real sense of grievance and anger. And the grievance was about the fall from greatness of the Soviet Union. Now, so Yeltsin tried to lead his country through that with its democracy intact, and he succeeded until Putin destroyed it. Yeltsin was never able to fix the economy, really. So Putin comes in with a deep sense of grievance and burning with humiliation at what had happened to the Russians in the 90s. And he needed an explanation that came readily to hand for why that had happened. And on the one hand, he blamed Gorbachev for surrendering instead of fighting. And he bitterly resents the fact that Gorbachev didn't kill as many millions of people as he needed to just to stay in power. But he also blamed the West in many respects, mostly unfairly, honestly, for Russia's humiliation. And then we had a narrative rapidly emerge in the early Putin years that not only had the West contributed to Russia's humiliation in this way and mistreated Russia in various ways in the 90s, but now the West was trying to prevent Russia, as he kept saying, from rising from its knees. And that the West was trying to keep Russia down. And he began to elaborate a series of narratives which attributed all kinds of malevolence and, frankly, much more thinking and coherence in Western policies than has ever existed in them to us, and also made the mistake that most humans make of solipsism, of imagining that he was at the center of everybody's thought and that everything that we were doing in the world was aimed at Russia in some way. And so he created this narrative, which he has been pumping into the Russian population ever since.
Well, when things are going chaotically wrong, one of the simplest things to do always is to identify make a unitary assumption of cause and to make it external.
Of course.
It's convenient in 50 ways.
Right.
First of all, it gives you an enemy to unite against. It gives you an enemy to talk about politically. It solves your conscience. It's also very simple because the reason that the former Soviet Union was so catastrophically chaotic in the 1990s, the reasons for that are unbelievably complicated and detailed.
Right.
And they go all the way from the highest levels of government to the nature of arrangements within families, right? The whole society was authoritarian for, 70 years, murderously authoritarian. And to unravel that and to take responsibility for it and to figure out how to fix it is way harder than to blame almost all of it on an external enemy.
Right.
Especially when you're also motivated, as you said, by this sense of thwarted destiny, which we could identify. I mean, in the West, we do regard a certain degree of patriotism as noble and justifiable. And you can see how that, under some conditions, noble and justifiable motivation would get hijacked if there was also reason to externalize blame for conditions, for resentment generated by genuine chaos.
Right. And all of this leads to the externalization of grievance and the feeding of a grievance narrative that blames the West and then articulates this theory that the West is focused on preventing Russia from attaining its natural position of greatness in the world and so on.